Hello and welcome to episode number 48 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, May the 10th. I'm not Melissa Agnes, but this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. So, Melissa, how did I do?
Oh my goodness, Garth, you did wonderful. It was so great to hear the intro told back to me.
Oh, good fun to do that. Thanks for having me on again.
Of course, thank you for coming on again.
Here I am. I'm popping up again on your podcast.
Yes. So for listeners out there, as I'm sure you could tell from the very start of this episode, we're doing something a little bit different today. So Garth Rowan is a good friend and colleague of mine. We did episode 36 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast together, where we discussed crisis simulations. And actually to date, that is still my number one most downloaded and listened to podcast. So that's wonderful. So Garth is a former reporter who specializes in crisis communications, and we do quite a lot of collaborative work and actual client work together.
That's so true, yeah.
Yes, and so for those of you who don't know yet, I recently had the honor and privilege of giving a TEDx Talk in LA. And so I wanted to bring that message, the TEDx Talk, to my podcast listeners, and I invited Garth Rowan to come and interview me. So how this podcast is going to take shape is in a few seconds, we're going to bring you the podcast, the TED Talk, so you'll listen to it. That'll take about 18 minutes. It is titled "The Secret to Successful Crisis Management in the 21st Century," and I hope that it inspires and motivates you because it's really an important message. And then we will pick up after those 18 minutes, and we're going to do an interview where I am actually the guest this time, and Garth will be interviewing me for two reasons. On two subjects. First, it will be a little bit of the process of what it is to create a TEDx Talk, because I know that there's probably a ton of listeners out there who may be thinking, contemplating, or maybe even in the process of creating your own talk. So I wanted to share a little bit about my experience and my process so that I could hopefully help you in yours. And the second is that the TEDx Talk itself is only 18 minutes. So you don't really get to go into full detail in 18 minutes. You get to kind of give a broad overview and hopefully inspire people and motivate people. So Garth and I are going to go into a little bit more of the detail of what the secret is to successful crisis management in this 21st century. So I wanted to actually give a little bit of a side note too, because what I did was I took the video, which you can find online, of the TED Talk, and I brought it into GarageBand to make it audio. So unfortunately, the audio quality of the TEDx Talk itself on the podcast isn't as great quality as I like my podcast to be, but that's why. So without further ado, here is my TEDx Talk of 2015, The Secret to Successful Crisis Management in the 21st Century. So I wanted to start off by sharing with you an image of a sign that I recently came across online. This sign is intended to be displayed in the emergency stairwell of a public building, and it reads, "In case of fire, exit building before tweeting about it." It's comical. I think that probably to some point, this sign was intended to be funny when it was created, to some degree. But it's quite realistic, isn't it? I mean, it precisely depicts the society in which we live today. We live in a world today where people, all of us, we seem to have this insatiable need, this urge to share everything that we experience as we experience it in real time to the social web. And the downside of this is that this reality has created some major challenges for organizations and their crisis management. For example, a couple years ago, there was a train derailment. It was a passenger train, and during the derailment, some of the passenger carts toppled over. Many people were injured, and some people even lost their lives. In one of the carts that toppled over was a woman who, fortunately, was unharmed. But when she realized what had just happened, her first reaction, her first instinct, was to grab her phone, snap a picture, share that picture with commentary to social media, and then dial 911 for help. Her first instinct was to share her experience. Now let's think of the train company, that before they even had the chance to assess the gravity of this crisis, possibly before they even had the chance to learn that one of their trains had in fact derailed, they were being contacted by the media because this image had now gone viral and people wanted to know what happened. When did it happen? Where did it happen? Why did it happen? How many people are injured? Did anybody die? This one woman's instinct to share her experience resulted in amplifying the challenges that this organization needed to deal with, needed to face throughout the crisis. Social media, the real-time news cycle, and mobile technology. These things have come together and they've transformed the landscape for crisis management. They've presented us with some major challenges, such as the heightened speed at which we need to be able to respond and communicate in real time today. Or the fact that everything today, everything is public. Or the fact that this real-time news cycle makes it increasingly difficult for you to get ahead of the story before the story is already ahead of you. And yet, whether we like it or not, these are today's crisis realities. And successful crisis management depends on your team's ability to manage these real-time challenges that this digital landscape presents to us in a crisis while simultaneously actually managing the actual crisis in real time. Successful crisis management today depends on your team's ability to do this. So then how do you arm your team with the skills and the knowledge and the mindset and the tools to successfully manage a crisis in this 21st century? The reality is that in order to get ahead of the news cycle, in order to position your organization as a voice of trust, credibility, and leadership in a crisis, which ultimately is the goal, in order to do that effectively, crisis management today needs to, in large part, be instinctive rather than solely reactionary. That just like the lady in my train derailment story whose first instinct was to share her experience, you want your team to instinctively know how to identify risk and opportunity. You want them to instinctively know how to communicate, when to communicate, and where to communicate in real time in a crisis. So if crisis management today needs to in large part be instinctive, then the question becomes, how do you cultivate these instincts? These instincts are developed by choosing to be proactive every day. By being proactive, we want to make these crisis realities work for us rather than against us. Captain Chris Shung from the Mountain View Police Department in California says it beautifully. He says that every single day, Mountain View PD works both online and offline to take proactive initiatives to build trust and develop and instill credibility with their stakeholders. And he calls this building a bank of community trust. And in 2014, Mountain View PD experienced a very serious internal crisis that was made public. This crisis could have very well destroyed the reputation and the credibility of this organization, of this police department, as an authoritative figure within their community. And Captain Chris Shung says that because of the proactive initiatives his team had taken every day to instill this trust and instill this credibility, that when the crisis struck, they absolutely needed to make a withdrawal out of this bank. But there was still enough trust left over. That because they had taken these proactive initiatives every day, their stakeholders, their community, knew in their hearts that this crisis was not a direct reflection on the police department as a whole. And because they had taken these proactive initiatives every day, their team knew instinctively how to communicate and where to communicate in real time throughout the crisis. They knew what their stakeholders expected of them, and they knew where to go to make sure that their communications were real time and were appropriate. And as a result of all of this crisis did not directly impact the reputation of this police department at all. Contrarily, we could look at an organization like Anthem. Anthem, this mega huge organization, recently went through a very serious data breach at the start of this year that resulted in 80 million of their stakeholders' confidential and private information being hacked. And like we've already talked about today through different sessions, and like we've come to learn collectively, this digital landscape, this digital era, presents a new risk, these data breaches and these IT risks, to every single organization. This is a predictable risk. And yet, when Anthem was hacked, it also came out that Anthem hadn't taken any precautionary measures leading up to the crisis to do whatever was in their power to minimize this risk. They weren't even doing things like encrypting their data. And because this was a predictable risk, this inaction was seen as unacceptable by their stakeholders, not to mention because as a result of this hack, 80 million of their stakeholders' confidential information is now being sold on the black market, and these people may just have to deal with the risk of identity theft for the rest of their lives. So this inaction on Anthem's part was seen as extremely unacceptable. But now let's pretend that Anthem had adapted this type of proactive mindset into the very culture of their organization, and thus into the very foundation, the fundamentals of their crisis management strategy. They would have empowered their team to foresee a risk like this, and they would have taken proactive measures to minimize the risk to the best of their capability. And by adapting this type of proactive thinking and empowering their team to seek out opportunities, they also may have said, hey, how can we take this initiative and use it as an opportunity to connect with our stakeholders? They could have, for example, sent out a direct communication to each of their stakeholders saying something along the lines of, we realize that in this digital era, a data breach hack is a risk that is unfortunately leaves every single organization vulnerable. But we also realize that you trust us with your information. And we want you to know that we take your trust extremely seriously. And that's why we've chosen to do X, Y, and Z, to do our utmost to keep your confidential information as safe and secure as we possibly can. Now, I'm not saying that had they done this, that the hack wouldn't have happened. But had they done this and the hack still happened to happen, imagine the reaction, the benefit of the doubt that their stakeholders would have given them. They would have recalled this communication. They would have said, you know, Anthem told us that this was a risk. They also told us what they were doing to minimize this risk. And yeah, it sucks that it happened, but you know what? We trust Anthem. And we trust that they're going to take the right steps moving forward. That power of the benefit of the doubt is something, as you know, that is invaluable in a crisis. And it's by adapting this type of proactive mindset into the very culture of your organization and into the very fundamentals of your crisis management strategy, that is how you're going to cultivate these instincts, give your team experiences, empower your team to take initiatives and to seek out opportunities. And that is the secret to successful crisis management in the 21st century. And the good news is that this digital landscape, although it presents us with so many obstacles and so many challenges in our crisis management today, it also provides you with unprecedented opportunity. We've seen a little bit about this throughout the talks today. But if we just want to take mobile technology as an example, there are an estimated 7 billion people on this planet. And a recent UN study revealed that 6 out of the 7 billion people on this planet have access to mobile devices. 6 out of the 7 billion people on this planet have access to mobile devices. That's more people with mobile phones than have working toilets. Mobile devices, the very tools, the very technology that is currently in each and every one of your pockets right now is also in the pockets of each and every one of your stakeholders right now. What kind of opportunity does that provide to your crisis management, to your crisis prevention, to your communications, if you start adapting this type of proactive and innovative mindset? There are some really, really great organizations out there that are actually leveraging the power of mobile technology in this digital landscape as their crisis preparedness and crisis management strategies are into them. For example, the National Weather Service, we heard about them earlier, but the National Weather Service has leveraged the power of mobile technology for their hazardous emergency alert warnings. So say there's a region that's under tornado watch, what the National Weather Service does is they send out a text message, an SMS, to the cell towers in that region. And those cell towers then geo-target every single mobile device within the vicinity. So it doesn't matter if people are at home, it doesn't matter if they're in their cars, it doesn't matter if they're driving in to that region. The second they're in that zone, their cell phones ping to alert them that the region is under tornado watch and to seek shelter. And this proactive initiative so far has saved countless lives by giving people up to a 15-minute head start to seek shelter. And it's not just government agencies. BBC, the World News Organization, at the end or the second half of last year, 2014, BBC decided that they had enough of the Ebola crisis. They decided that they wanted to help manage the world crisis of Ebola. So what did they do? They first armed themselves with the problem. Why did Ebola spread so quickly throughout West Africa last year? A big part of the reason is that West Africans don't have access to the tools, to the resources, to the education that we're very privileged to have access to in the Western world. And as a result, West Africans were making themselves increasingly exposed to the virus without even realizing it. This was a major, major problem. This is a major reason as to why Ebola spread so quickly throughout West Africa last year. So armed with the problem, BBC said, okay, so if education is the solution, how can we educate West Africans, but how can we make sure to reach them directly? How can we know that our initiatives are actually going to reach them, are actually going to work? They thought about developing a mobile app, but a mobile app takes time and resources to develop and to launch, so they kind of X'd that thought out, and they said, you know what, let's turn our attention to see what West Africans use. What do they use? What do they use in their daily lives? It turns out that West Africans, as a community, as a culture, love this one app. It's called WhatsApp. For those of you who aren't familiar, WhatsApp is a text messaging app that is freely downloadable to any smart mobile device. And West Africans use this app every single day to communicate with their loved ones throughout the day. So BBC said, you know what, let's leverage that. And they launched what they called the WhatsApp Ebola service. This service was marketed to West Africans, and it allowed them to opt in to receive up to 3 pieces of educational information every single day on Ebola. They received this information directly in their pockets, firstly, and directly on an app, on a tool that they were already using in their daily lives. And it worked. West Africans began to subscribe to this service in the masses, and within just a couple of weeks, BBC was being contacted by organizations from around the world, from humanitarian organizations to government entities to their media partners from around the world. All these organizations were coming to BBC and saying, oh my goodness, this is working. This initiative is helping us manage the crisis of Ebola. How can we help you? How can we collaborate with you to push this initiative even further? By adapting this type of proactive and innovative mindset into the very thinking, into the very strategy, into the very culture of their organization, BBC didn't just succeed at helping to manage a world crisis, but a world news organization managed to position their organization as a voice of trust, credibility, and leadership in a world crisis. The advantages available to you that, somebody said it earlier, it's not about money, it's not about money, it's not about money. You have tools in your pocket right now that provide you with unprecedented communications and emergency management and crisis management opportunities, and they are available to you right now for free, sitting in your pockets, waiting for you to leverage them. But in order to do that, we have to develop this way of thinking. We have to encourage every single member of your team to proactively look for risk, to identify risk, and to proactively minimize it. To look for opportunities to connect and build trust and credibility with your stakeholders so that you can fall back on that and use that to your advantage in a crisis. And the good news is that this digital landscape, with all of its challenges, presents you with unprecedented opportunity to do that. So I know that I'm the last speaker today, and I'd like to leave you with a last thought that goes for my talk, but it goes for everything that we've heard already today, throughout the day. What's the one thing you could proactively do right now to minimize the current risk? And remember that this doesn't have to be an overwhelming task or, a restructure of your entire internal corporate culture. Being proactive simply means to choose to take one step in the right direction every day. So what's one risk that is currently lingering that you can proactively minimize right now? And in doing so, how can you leverage that initiative as an opportunity to connect, to build trust, and instill credibility with your stakeholders? And when you're thinking that through, take the time, I challenge you, take the time to go and to identify where your stakeholders are. Where are they online and offline? What technology, what tools do they use in their daily lives? How do they prefer to consume their media? Because answering this question, getting this information, may just provide you with a unique opportunity to position your organization as a voice of trust, credibility, and leadership, and a unique opportunity for your crisis preparedness and your crisis management. Thank you.
Melissa, congratulations on that talk. I've had the opportunity to see the tape, and it's a great performance, I must say. And as someone who likes to coach presentation, I was really impressed with what you did.
Well, thank you very much. It was so much fun. It was such a challenge. It was so exciting. So
let's talk about TED. So a lot of folks have heard of TED. I know people know it stands for Technology, Entertainment, Design. They've been around for about 25 years doing these talks. And they've had a whole raft of tremendous characters coming through the TED Talks, which are a little bit different from the TEDx Talks. I guess we'll get into that in a minute. But world leaders from Bill Clinton, Nobel Prize winners, Bill Gates, people from the world of entertainment, Bono, even Jamie Oliver, the Naked Chef. So there's a lot of great, interesting characters coming on there. You were on TEDx, which is a little bit different. Tell us about TEDx and how it differs.
Sure. So TEDx is, and I'm probably not saying this as best as somebody else would who actually hosts the event, but TEDx is basically a license of TED. So TED themselves put on a conference every year, usually in Vancouver, if I'm not mistaken. This year anyways, it was in Vancouver. And it's an amazing, their reputation precedes them. It's an amazing organization, an amazing conference. And then what they do is they license out their name, so TED with the X extended on it, so TEDx, to cities all over the world. There's thousands of TEDx conferences that are put on by cities and municipalities and organizations and universities all around the world every single year. And it's the same style. So it's 18 minutes. You're not allowed, you're not allowed to have notes. It's slides on the minimal side of slides. So really more it's about the presentation and your words. And again, 18 minutes of motivating, inspiring, aspirational speech for listeners, for the audience.
Now, it's a big deal to be on TED. Let me ask you how you got the invite.
I think it's a big deal too. I took it as quite an honor. I still think
it is an honor.
It is an honor. Yes. So, so they have a process, I believe, where you can nominate yourself, or that you can have somebody else nominate you. But everybody that I've spoken to, and actually how it happened to me, was the city of LA in particular. The city of LA's emergency management department put on as their second annual TEDx conference. And they hired me last year in 2014 to give a presentation at one of their annual conferences. And after they saw me present, they just kind of came up and said, "Hey, we're doing a TEDx. We want you as a speaker." So, and that's what I hear from everybody who's done TED or TEDx. I've never actually heard of somebody who got in, and I could be wrong. There's probably people out there who have, but really, it's upon invite.
And when you get that sort of exposure, I think I read on TED's website that there's been something like 1 billion views of TED Talks.
It's magnificent.
130 countries. So huge exposure, huge prep, because I know you and I did a bit of work on the prep together. That was great fun. Yeah, tell us a little bit about how much effort you put into this.
Oh my goodness, people are going to think I'm crazy. So I took this so I'm a professional speaker, as probably most people know, and so I'm used to being on stage. I'm used to giving talks. I'm used to my message, but this was a little bit of a higher caliber in my mind, in my opinion, and so I really wanted to take the time to do the TED brand justice. So I spent 3 months. 3 months prepping for this talk. The first month, what I did was I just purely allowed myself to research. I read 3 amazing books, which will be in the show notes below for those who are interested. The first one was Talk Like TED by Carmine Gallo, which I highly, highly recommend whether you're giving a TEDx talk or a TED talk or not. He's an amazing writer on giving speeches and presenting. The second book I read was Power Cues by Nick Morgan. Nick Morgan was a guest on the Crisis Intelligence podcast a few months ago, I suppose now. He's great for leadership. He's great as a speaking coach. His book helped me immensely just on my own power cues, so my body language and things like that. And then the third book I read was How to Deliver a TED Talk by Jeremy Donovan. And that one, it was a good book, but it wasn't as good, in my opinion, as the other 2. But all 3 of them together just really gave me a good sense of what I needed to do, how I needed to design the speech, the arc, everything. And then a part of my research was also to go, and I must have watched the top 20, 30, 40 TEDx or TED presentations, so that's a combination of TED and TEDx, probably about 3 or 4 times each, and they were just so inspiring to me as a speaker, as well as a future. I was actually called this week a TED alum, so I thought that was kind of cool. So as a future TED alum, to paraphrase a friend of mine. And yeah, so that's the first month. I spent a month researching and just kind of getting my head into it. The second month I spent designing my speech. So I knew what my message was, but it's hard to take a message that you usually deliver over the course of an hour to 3 hours, depending on the venue, and to put it down into 18 minutes.
Sure, yeah, that's always going to be tough. But I know you put a huge amount of effort into doing this. What are you expecting to get out of it?
What am I? Nothing. I know.
I don't mean money, because I know they don't pay.
No.
You don't do it for the honor of being asked.
Of course.
But you gave up about 3 months of your other work in many ways to do this. Why did you think that was justified?
Like you said earlier, the platform is immense. The having that TEDx logo behind you when you're standing on stage in the video is just such an honor and a privilege, and the reach, the caliber. I'm a professional speaker, so I knew that this would be a really great video to have on my speaking website, as well as my message. So I'm a professional speaker, yes, but I'm a crisis consultant first and foremost, and this to me is the secret to successful crisis management in this day and age, and that was so important for me to share. And even in creating the speech, so it proved to be very difficult to take my message and to condense it down into 18 minutes.
Yeah, it's tough, eh? Yeah.
Absolutely. But actually it's a challenge and an exercise that I would insist or recommend that everybody go through, because it really allows you to really sum up and to really choose your words very carefully and very thoughtfully. And an additional challenge for me was that in the audience was going to be members of the emergency management department for LA. That's who was in the audience. But I knew that after the audience, so when I received the video and shared the video, the audience would be everybody else. So not necessarily just emergency managers, but corporate communicators and crisis communicators and just the whole world that would be whoever is interested in crisis. So that was an additional challenge of really being relatable to the people in the audience, but also making sure that I used examples and used my words wisely, chose my words wisely, so that it would also be relatable to everybody else after the day of the event who would be watching the video.
Well, you certainly did very well to do all that. Let's get into the message now. Now, you're talking about some of the elements and the examples that you gave. I really like the anthem example in particular. I thought that was a really, really strong one. I was stunned. We were chatting about this, about the stat on the spread of the technology. And it made me want to get into learning more about that. And I know you're talking about just the number of cell phones subscriptions. Well, I mean, they are subscriptions. That's how we count them.
So,
Tell us more about that.
Well, from the UN study.
Yeah.
So basically, the UN study reveals that, and I think it's pretty profound, is that 6 out of the 7 billion people on this planet have access to mobile technology. So that could also be mobile apps, not mobile apps, I'm sorry, iPads and tablets and things like that. I don't know if it's subscriptions. I guess that's how you count it, because you look at either number of mobile devices sold annually or globally, or I guess you could also look at how many people are paying for mobile reception. And
yeah, I guess subscriptions is about probably the only way to really track it tightly. But I also checked up on that story, and I saw that, maybe as expected, the 3 top user countries, China, India, and the US. What I thought was really quite stunning, and fantastically interesting, and I know it goes into your Ebola story, is that in Africa, there's one landline per 100 people, but 63 cell phones per 100 people.
Wow.
What a sign of all that in 20 years of cell phone technology. So it leads us into what a huge change, what a sea change in the world of crisis communications and how crises are handled by organizations, and how the public, their role changed in the way reporting works nowadays.
Absolutely. And all of this has an impact on crisis preparedness, in the sense of, like I said, the challenges and the risks out there for organizations, and the escalation of, issues to crises and coverage and getting out of the story and all of that. But it also, and I think I hope I say this, well in my speech, in my talk, is that the other side of that, the flip side of that, is that the opportunity is so profound. It's unprecedented when we get ahead of it.
And I know that when it comes into opportunity, you're a huge fan of the Zappos online shoe company when it comes to opportunity, and just the way their culture takes on opportunity. And that seems to be your main message in your summary at the very end, that all of us, if we can find that one thing to change every day and look for opportunity, and really that's something that I know you wanted to have more time to explain. So I guess you got more time now on your own show.
On my own
show.
So
let's talk about why you love that Zappos case study so much that you couldn't talk too much about.
I don't even think that I brought it up. I think that's one of, in the different versions and, narrowing in on my message throughout the process of creating my speech, Zappos got left out because, for a number of different
18
reasons,
minutes is
you have to choose wisely.
An earlier version I saw Zappos.
Yes, but Zappos, I love them as an example, and I know I've probably talked about them in the past on the show. But they're a beautiful example of an organization that has the corporate culture that puts customers, that puts stakeholders, that puts doing the right thing, making a lasting, beautiful impression on people as part of the core of their culture within the organization. And I mean, I've seen videos where Zappos staff literally say, this company, this brand working here has made me a better human being. And for me, that's a huge message. That's a huge impact on not just the people who work for you, but then it extends to everybody that they deal with on behalf of your organization, on behalf of the brand. And so many different things about Zappos, but I can't help but feel that if ever, and I hope that they don't, but if ever Zappos does, come into a crisis, that, talking about in my TEDx talk, I talk about it's about cultivating these instincts and making it. Crisis management can't just be to fall back on a reactive plan, but it needs to be instilled. It needs to be developed and honed as skills, as instinct for your team to understand instinctively, how to respond, where to respond, when to respond, what is expected of them by stakeholders. And and Zappos, I think, is a beautiful example of that if they were ever to fall into a crisis or experience a crisis, that I would put money on the fact that I would, bet on them to say they would know instinctively how to respond. And why? Because they have this daily mindset, this daily corporate culture that is all about giving this great lasting impression, making a difference in one person's world. I mean, there's the story of the lady who called in after her husband had passed away to say...
It's a great story. I love that story.
To say that she needed to return the shoes that he had bought, that he never wore. And instead of just saying, yeah, okay, no problem, like most organizations would do, they actually, the person on the other end of that phone, who was not a senior executive or manager of the organization, took it upon himself, and that's the whole message here, is that he was empowered by the organization to take it upon himself. Not only did he or she, it might have been a woman, so I'm not sure there, but not only did that representative send a stamped box for that lady to send the shoes back, but they also sent a bouquet of flowers on behalf of the Zappos team to that woman. And think of the lasting impression that woman and every single person that she knows will have of this organization for the rest of their lives. There's nothing. It would be very challenging to make that woman not like that organization.
Exactly, and it's, as you say, it's and that's where the crisis side of this comes in.
Yes.
It's all about instinct nowadays, because the world moves so quickly. The news cycles are tsunamis of news, and what Zappos looks to do is maybe not even sell shoes. What they sell is customer service,
an experience,
Absolutely. Yeah. And shoes are the byproduct of the whole thing. Let's talk about more. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that's amazing. And this is what, organizations should strive to implement and to adapt, to implement into the very culture of their organization, because that's when you're going to have that, raving fan base that if a crisis strikes, they will give you the benefit of the doubt. That will be their natural instinct, and that gives you an edge.
So what we need now is teams inside organizations, which are that adaptive, that flexible, and that instinctive. And how are we going to encourage that in organizations? That's a tricky thing to do.
It is, because it's also a scary thing.
Very scary. We should maybe just go through the end of the Zappos story. For the board of directors of Zappos, some of the ideas that the founder, Tony Hsieh, had were just a little too out there. And he had no end of trouble with his board, which, according to the news reports that I've read, led him to sell out to Amazon, because he felt that Amazon would keep the culture, and apparently they have done.
And it's interesting. Right now, they're going through a process internally. Zappos. I read a very long report, email actually from, I believe it was from Tony Hsieh to the team, that they are taking out the hierarchy structure. So there's not going to be any managers. It's going to be, everybody is going to have the same position, maybe not the same position, but the same level of authority, and that's going to be very interesting to see, because I think, I may be wrong, but to my knowledge, that's one of the first organizations to take that type of drastic internal culture move.
Yeah, really flatten the whole thing out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big risk, and not every organization is going to be up for that one. And I mean, we always think, don't we, that there's probably like three elements of clientele. There's the folks that don't even know that they should be preparing for a problem. They're just oblivious to what's going on, kind of like C-level companies. B-level companies might be ones that they know there's a problem, but they'll do the bare minimum. They'll get a plan. Maybe they got it a few years ago. They don't exercise it much, if at all, and they'll kind of hope for the best if things go wrong. And then there's the A level of companies, the dream companies, that know that there's problems out there, and they're always practicing. They're always looking to improve their skills, and they're the ones, of course, that we hold out as examples.
Absolutely.
But some of the things that tend to lead to this culture of instinctiveness. I mean, read to the folks at home some of the things that Zappos did. I mean, they've got a nap room, a petting zoo, a makeshift bowling alley. They've got karaoke moments. They've got bald and blue days where employees occasionally shave each other's heads. This is not for everybody.
Oh my goodness. No, it's not for
I know.
What's interesting is the karaoke moments. It's not karaoke night, and maybe it is karaoke night, but karaoke moments to me, the vision that just came into my mind was somebody goes like, hey Garth, you're at your station, in your office or at your cubicle, and somebody says, hey Garth, and throws you a mic and goes, hit it. And it's like a karaoke moment.
I'd be there. You know me. I'd be on that one.
Yes, I know
I can't
you
sing,
would be.
but I do it anyway.
Absolutely, and we'd all have fun with you.
Yeah, I know. But I guess I mean, what we're seeing now is because the world is shifting so much, and the whole cell phone numbers, et cetera, and the way news is reported nowadays, the Twitterverse, all these things, it's all changing. I guess what we're trying to do in organizations and as folks who support organizations, we're trying to find the new norm. And so you're going to get some extreme behavior, but it's all about trying to find like a new way of surviving, flourishing, hopefully, in this new world.
And in order to do that, you have to give yourself a head start. And that's the whole thing. It's interesting. I was on a radio show a couple of weeks ago in Montreal, and a caller called in and asked the question. I thought it was such a beautifully laid out question, brilliant question. She said, what's the difference? Because I was talking about being proactive and different things. And she says, what's the difference between active and being proactive? And I thought, wow, what a great question.
Nice, yeah. Good question.
Beautiful question. So the difference, in my mind anyways, is, and what we help our clients do, is being active is doing what you need to do. It's doing the minimum. It's having that crisis plan. You absolutely need to have that crisis plan. I mean, it's a great exercise to go through. It's a great fallback. It's a great resource. It's a great tool. You absolutely need to have that crisis plan. And that is the bare minimum that you have to do. And that is being active. Active in your crisis preparedness, in your crisis planning. Being proactive is what my TEDx Talk is all about. It's about taking initiatives every day to build trust and instill credibility with your stakeholders. It's taking initiatives every day and developing this mindset where your team is empowered to identify risk, absolutely, as well as to identify opportunity, whether it's from those risks or just new opportunity, like, for example, mobile technology, understanding your stakeholders, where they are, how they're using it, what they use in their daily lives. I mean, I think the example of BBC, who, for listeners out there, if you haven't heard it yet, I have another podcast episode with the apps editor of BBC World News, where he actually talks about the entire strategy of their WhatsApp Ebola service. And it's amazing. He goes into so much detail of the actual, behind the scenes strategy development and what happened. And it's a beautiful example, but it is a proactive example. And it is in that proactive effort that BBC, a world news organization, helped to manage a world crisis, the world crisis of Ebola last year. That is the difference between being active and being proactive. And in today's day and age, organizations need to start adapting this type of mindset. They need to start looking towards being proactive in their daily communications, in their daily efforts.
So true. And another part of that is having one thing to focus on.
Yes.
Not splitting your focus. And I know that was a call that you made at the end of the talk. It's getting folks to focus on that one thing. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about what brought you to that statement?
Well, actually, you did, Garth.
Thank you.
But absolutely. So part of the process of me...
Yeah, I did. But here's how I came to that. I mean, I got to throw it back to you there on that one. Because it comes from a book that we both know and love. And it was a book that you recommended to me.
Yes, it was.
And it's the one thing.
The one thing. It's the best book I read in 2014.
That's right. And you recommended it to me. You got me a copy, and I have since passed that book on. And it's one of these. I mean, self-help doesn't do it justice. I'm not a big fan of the self-help genre, but this book it just spells out this is a way to get your focus down tight. And I think you probably would admit, Melissa, that you use that concept for your TED Talk.
Oh,
That
well, you
became
have to.
your one thing.
Yes. So, and I'll go back just a little bit to your question, which was, talk about the one thing or why the one thing. It's because when you talk about being proactive, when you talk about developing this type of or instilling this type of corporate culture, this mindset into the foundation of your organization, it's very overwhelming. Where do you start? Where do you end? Where do you focus? Where do you go? What do you do? Who do you speak to? It's so overwhelming. So in order to funnel that down. And then again, it goes into, the concept of the book, The One Thing, which is a brilliant book. I recommend it to anybody listening out there.
Yeah, Gary Keller wrote it, by the way, in case folks are thinking what it's all about.
Yes.
And I guess the one thing, he asks, what is the one thing that you can do? And he says, such that by doing it, everything else will be either easier or unnecessary.
It's on my wall.
And you on your wall?
It's on my wall. I have it on a little postcard or cue card on my wall. It is. It's what can you do? What's one focus? Don't spread your focus. Don't have two really important things to do. Have one really important thing to do and focus on that. And then how can you accomplish that? And that's where the question comes in. What's the one thing you can do to accomplish that such that by doing it, everything else becomes easy or even unnecessary? And go ahead.
Yeah, and that's a huge point of today. I think for folks running crisis teams, rather than look for the answer, you focus on the question, because it's the quality of the question which is going to get you the quality in the answer that you want. So It's by asking the question. Ask the wrong question, get the wrong answer.
And choose one focus. I mean, crisis preparedness is you'd think that it's very niche, it's very focused, it's very narrow, but look, I do a whole podcast every week, always with a different subject or a different angle or a different topic, all on the same topic. So it's very wide, especially when you're doing it within your organization. It's very, very wide. So in this sense of being proactive, like I say in the TEDx talk, being proactive means to choose. It's a choice to choose to take one step in the right direction every day. And in that one step, what's the one thing? Where's your one area of focus? Maybe, we watched the whole debacle recently with Bud Light. And we've seen it over and over again, the different campaigns that come out that just are not, people don't take the time within the organization to ask themselves the question of, what's the worst that can come of this? I think marketers and communicators, they get so excited on these ideas and they want to be edgy and they want to be new and they want to be fresh and they want to, be whatever they want to be, and they end up making these really bad choices simply because they did not take the time to say, how can this possibly be misconstrued? How can this be possibly, misinterpreted? What can happen? What can go wrong? What's the worst that can come of this? And that's one thing to focus on, making sure that on every single level and every single department that touches communications, that people are empowered to ask that question before any communication goes out on behalf of your organization. That's one thing. That is being proactive. That is being preventative in terms of risk and crisis and issues. And that is something that you can proactively do internally. That is a mindset that you can adapt internally and instill that will go do wonders for your crisis prevention and your communications.
I feel another podcast coming on, all about the one thing and change of culture. I think that would be superbly useful.
I agree.
For folks to look at.
I agree. Very exciting.
So, Melissa, we've talked a lot about the background to your ideas around the TED Talks. I wonder if you could just summarize. Is there anything you'd like to tell us about the extent of the process that you went through to create this TED Talk?
Sure. I gave a little bit about how I got my mind into it and how the research that I did, those amazing books that I recommend to anybody who is a speaker, never mind even if you're not doing a TEDx talk. But I would like to say that, it was like I said earlier, it was a challenging process just to condense and to really hone in on 18 minutes and to make every single second, because in 18 minutes, every second has to count. You don't have time. For example, my BBC story, I wanted to share that story in the TEDx, and I started, rehearsing it and saying it the way that I normally do when I'm on stage. And it turned out that it was like 6 or 7 minutes long. It's like, that's a third of my TEDx talk. No way. So what are the salient points there? How do I narrow in on them? And it was an interesting process because, and I have to thank you and so many other of my amazing friends and colleagues that helped me, because I would create my speech and then I would record myself and then I would send it to you and to countless others that I trust and really admire and respect. And they'd come back with their feedback, and their feedback would help me, your feedback as well, would help me really say, oh, they're asking a question that they shouldn't be asking that question. That means that I wasn't clear enough. So how can I make that sentence clearer or that section clearer? And so that was a really interesting exercise to go through, as well as, I'm so grateful for all of the help from my friends and colleagues that were so willing and just so generous with their time to do that for me. And I can honestly say that my TEDx talk without that step would not have been what it was. So, a huge thank you out there, but also to show the depth of, 18 minutes. It's challenging, especially when you have a brand, you have the TED brand behind you, and you just need to do it justice. Hopefully I did that.
I believe you did, and it was a pleasure to work with you on part of it. And I look forward to your next TED Talk.
Actually, what's interesting? I'm doing a similar to a TED Talk. It's not the same. It's a new initiative. It's for the policing industry, and they're calling it WinX.
Oh.
So when is that big question? It's what's important now? And so WinX for the policing industry, because as we all know, they're in a very big crisis right now. And they're going to be putting on a conference later on this year, which will hopefully be the first of many. And they've invited me. It's the same. It's a lot of TED alum that's going to be there that presenting. It's 18 minutes. It's the same format. And that as well, because I'm just, so passionate about this right now, the crisis in North America with police agencies and their communities. And I'm always looking for ways to help in that area. And so I'm very honored and was very honored that they came and they asked me. So stay tuned, listeners, for that one, because that'll be something I'll be promoting and talking about as the date comes clear. That's not until the end of this year, but it's another big one.
Oh, great. I look forward to seeing and hearing that one. I'm sure it'll be up there on YouTube with everything else if you get a chance.
Oh, it certainly will.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on the show. It was fun to be in this seat.
Yeah, it was so much fun to be in this seat. Absolutely. Change of roles. Garth, but let me take my seat back just for a few seconds. Where can everybody find and follow you?
They can find me at www.beready.ca. I specialize in critical communication. And I love to keep on working with Melissa on our simulations.
Absolutely. You can bet on it. Thank you so much, Garth.
Pleasure. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast with me, Melissa Agnes. I release a new episode every Sunday, so if you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe to this Crisis Intelligence Podcast on iTunes or Stitcher so you don't miss out on any future episodes. While you're at it, feel free to leave me a rating or review on iTunes. This will go such a long way in helping me get this important information to more people just like you to help benefit their crisis management and crisis communications. Additionally, if you'd like to have me come and speak at an upcoming event that you may be organizing, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. You can email me at melissa@melissaagnes.com. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.